When you think of Nazi Germany, a few names probably jump to mind. Hitler, of course, but right behind him, for a very long time, was this guy, Hermann Göring. He was a celebrated war hero, the main architect of the Nazi war machine, and Hitler's handpicked successor. So, how does someone go from being the second most powerful man in the Third Reich to a convicted war criminal? It's an incredible story, a real roller coaster, from the absolute heights of power to the very depths of infamy. I mean, that's really the central question for this whole explainer, right? How does a celebrated war hero become one of history's most notorious war criminals? It's a journey that really makes you think about power, about ambition, and just how far ideology can take someone. So, let's dive in and really unpack how it all went down. Okay, so section 1, from hero to henchman. To really get a handle on the man he became, you've got to go back to the beginning, back to the hero he was. Because before he was a Nazi, Goering was famous for something else entirely. Right, so picture this. It's post-World War I Germany. The country is just reeling from defeat and humiliation. And then you have Hermann Göring, born in 1893, who was a famed fighter pilot, a decorated national hero. I mean, this guy was a living symbol of Germany's past glory. And in that kind of environment, having that heroic public image, well, that made him an incredibly powerful and influential figure right from the get-go. And he didn't waste any time pivoting. By 1922, he joins the still pretty small Nazi party, and he brings all of that fame and credibility with him. A year later, in 23, he proves his loyalty. He's wounded right alongside Hitler during the failed Munich Putsch, which was their first big, disastrous attempt to seize power. That moment, it forged a really deep bond between the two of them. So fast forward to 1933, when the Nazis finally do take control, and guess who's perfectly positioned for a meteoric rise? Yup, Hermann Göring. And this brings us to our next section, forging a totalitarian state. Because from this point on, his influence just explodes. We're talking about an almost unimaginable concentration of power. This is really where Göring goes from being a follower to one of the central architects of the Nazi state itself. I mean, just look at the titles he held. His power was absolutely staggering, and it spread into every single corner of the regime. Think about it. He was the president of the German parliament, the Reichstag. He was commander-in-chief of the Air Force, the Luftwaffe. He founded the secret state police, the Gestapo. And on top of all that, he was the supervisor of the four-year plan. He wasn't just a military guy. He was literally everywhere. And that last one, the four-year plan, is so important. Because his power wasn't just political or military. It was economic. This plan, which he personally ran, was basically the engine of the entire Nazi war machine. His job was to make Germany totally self-sufficient and ready for a massive war, and that gave him unbelievable control over the country's entire industry and all of its resources. And if there was any doubt about his status, this official decree from Hitler himself just erases it. In the event of his death, I will be his successor. I mean, that wasn't just some casual promise made behind closed doors. That was the law. Hermann Göring was officially the number 2 man in the Third Reich. He was the designated successor. This was the absolute peak of his power. But you know what they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And with that much power comes a ton of accountability. And that brings us to the turning point, the grand failure. This is where the great architect of the Nazi state makes a huge mistake, one that would pretty much seal his downfall. So, the Battle of Britain. This was supposed to be Göring's moment of triumph, his crowning achievement. He went to Hitler and personally promised him that his air force, the Luftwaffe, would just crush England from the skies and achieve swift air superiority. But the reality? It was a complete and utter disaster, a decisive defeat. And this wasn't just a military loss that halted the Nazi advance. It absolutely shattered Göring's reputation and his standing with Hitler. And it's interesting, as his military influence started to fade, his personal greed just exploded. He directed the systematic looting of priceless art and wealth from all across the occupied territories. We're talking about a vast personal collection of stolen treasures. This wasn't just a bit of looting on the side. It was cultural theft on an industrial scale, and it adds a whole other layer to his long, long list of crimes. So as Germany started to collapse, so did Göring's entire world. And that brings us to our final chapter, the final judgment. We're talking about his capture and that final moment of reckoning for the massive role he played in the regime's atrocities. And it all happened fast. In May of 1945, the war in Europe is over, and so is Göring's freedom. He was captured by Allied forces. And just like that, it was the definitive end of all his power. The once feared second in command of the entire Third Reich was now just a prisoner. And when he was put on trial at Nuremberg, he wasn't just tried as a soldier who followed orders. No way. He was charged as one of the chief architects of the entire Nazi system, and the charges against him were just immense. Conspiracy against world peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, all of it reflecting his central role in some of the absolute worst atrocities in modern history. And this final timeline is just stark. It really shows how fast he fell. In 1945, he's captured. Later that year, he's charged at Nuremberg. By 1946, he's convicted and sentenced to death. In just over a year, he went from the height of power to a convicted war criminal on death row. But in one last act of defiance, he denied the Allies their justice. He committed suicide, taking a hidden poison capsule just hours before he was scheduled to be executed. So when you look at Göring's life, it's so much more than just a historical account, right? It's a truly chilling lesson. It's a stark, powerful reminder of the dangers of concentrating so much power in one place without any accountability. It shows how charisma and personal ambition, when they get mixed up with a destructive ideology and totally unchecked power, well, they can lead to catastrophe on a global scale. And all of this really leaves us with one final critical question. Because Göring's rise to power wasn't some kind of accident. It was made possible by a system that failed, that collapsed. So his story really forces us to ask ourselves, what safeguards can prevent the rise of figures like him in the future? What checks and balances do we have to fight to maintain, to make sure that power is never, ever again concentrated in such a dangerous and unaccountable way?